What's up, guys? Got to get this video out to you fine folks, and this is a packed card today. Like, basically every sport is in action. It's wild. Last night, 0-2, very unfortunate. Sacramento Kings, I mean, they were in that game in like the third quarter and then completely unraveled. I thought the Celtics would have run out of gas after what they had done the previous night, but that wasn't so that clearly did not get there. The LA Tech one, I think that one should have cashed, man. Louisiana Tech, they were winning. They were losing earlier in the game, but they had taken the lead like when it mattered. Like later in the game, they had a pretty big lead, and it looked like they were going to close it out, and then they let the entire lead slip. They still had the lead like in the closing seconds and let it go into overtime. I don't know if it went into one overtime or two overtimes, so then they wound up losing in whatever overtime it was. Just awful. When you have the underdog and it goes into overtime, I mean, that's kind of tells you that there is value in that play at least, but I think it should have gotten there. I think they should have won the game. I didn't look at the game statistically, but whatever. Not a good 0-2 night, and it's even worse that every single lean that I gave out in college basketball otherwise got there. Every single one, I think, was pretty much correct. Oh, my God. I hate when that happens. I got to try to be selective. I don't know how selective I'm being today because I got a lot of plays here, most of them in hockey, but I'm not able to stop myself here. So I got a lot of plays today. I'll start with the NFL game. I don't have a play on this NFL game, but this is Saints-Rams on a Thursday night game. The Rams kind of just sitting at a 4-point favorite, and it looks like the cash discrepancy is now slightly on the Saints, with the Rams being the public team with 74% of the tickets and 73% of the cash. The total has gone up from 44.5 to 46, although 72% of the tickets are on the over and 71% of the cash on the over. I think probably the best way to play this game would be to play the under here, because you've seen the Rams putting up some pretty high point totals recently. People kind of like that offense. Now Stafford looks in rhythm. Their running game is looking really good right now. They got Nakua. They got Kupp back. Like, their offense has been looking pretty good, but it's not like they've done it against like great defenses. I mean, Baltimore, they're not like that Baltimore defensive team of old, at least, and that wasn't really a good spot for Baltimore anyway. So I kind of like the under if you're going to play this game at all. And I think it's because it's a Thursday night game, which is conducive to a lower scoring game, but also this is like a playoff game, man. Both of these teams are in the playoff hunt, and I think it's going to play like that type of game. I think it's going to be a pretty big game for both teams, a tough game. I think both teams are going to show up. So that is conducive to the under as well, that style of play when it's like a playoff atmosphere. You got both teams sitting on the cusp of the playoffs here. As far as the side, I lean to the Rams slightly, mostly because the Rams, because it is a playoff game like this, I think the Rams have the experience factor in games like this. I don't trust Derek Carr at all. He's not very good in big games like this, whereas with the Rams, you got Matthew Stafford. I mean, he's a Super Bowl winner. He has succeeded in some of these huge games before. You got Sean McVay, a Super Bowl winning coach. You got like I said, the experience factor. Some of these guys are on that Rams Super Bowl team. The Rams have more big game experience, and I think that might come down. That might be what this game comes down to. The Rams might have the edge for that reason. I'm going to talk about it more in my NFL video that I got to get out shortly, so I will probably just repeat what I just said, but that is how I look at that game there. And the Rams being at home with the short turnaround time, I think that gives them a little bit of an edge as well. And it's a little bit more of an unfamiliar environment for the road team that tends to favor the home team a little bit on these quick turnaround Thursday night games. And the Rams played a worse game than the Saints did on Sunday. So, I mean, the Rams won and they covered. Unfortunately, they played Washington, but they didn't really – I mean, they were winning by a lot, so I think they just kind of took their foot off the gas. But that final score certainly doesn't look that good for the Rams. I think they kind of just maybe wanted to get in, get out, thought it would be an easy win. Excuse me. Which kind of it was, but that's kind of why I liked Washington in that one. The Saints had like a dominant victory, although it was over the New York Giants, so like who really cares? But the Giants had beaten the Packers the previous day, and people saw that and thought the Giants, hey, maybe the Giants are actually good. They're on a 3-game win streak, and the Saints really just totally stopped the Giants in their game. So I think the Rams, maybe there's even a little bit of value on the Rams because of last week's performances. And I also think that the Rams, they only have one way to get into the playoffs because they have to get a wild card spot. So I think this game matters more to the Rams slightly than it does to the Saints. The Saints are winning their division, and the Saints have slightly more room for error than the Rams do. The Rams cannot win their division. They need to get a wild card. They're like really in the thick of that battle, and they probably didn't even think they were going to be here with the way that they started out the season. They've been playing well recently. The Saints, they're tied for the lead in their division right now with Tampa, I believe, one game ahead of Atlanta. So, I mean, they still need to win, of course, but the Saints also could potentially get a wild card spot as well, but they can also win their division, and their division sucks. So even if the Saints lose this game, the division is not out of sight for them. So I lean to the Rams very slightly there, even though the market is somewhat against that. Certainly not going to play that one. Going to college football, let's go to this. What is this? This is the Boca Raton Bowl tonight. I actually have a play in this game, which, oh man, I'm not playing many bowls, trying to be selective. This line really hasn't moved very much. It looks like Syracuse. This is Syracuse in South Florida. Syracuse, they opened a 5.5-point favorite. It looks like they're kind of sitting at a 3-point favorite. It's kind of just been around 3, like, mostly the whole time this game has been on the board. 66% of the tickets and 65% of the cash are on South Florida, though. So the public seems to not really be they don't really want to be on Syracuse here. And Syracuse did not look good most of the season, but neither did South Florida. So both of these teams won their last game to get into the bowls. So they both were able to do that. I want to just take a look at this real quick here. So, I mean, that when a team like wins their final games just to become bowl eligible, that kind of tells you they're going to be a little bit motivated, because that tells you that they kind of want it, and they wanted to get those final wins. So with Syracuse, they had to win 2 of their last 3 games, whereas I think South Florida it was more like they kind of stumbled into it. Really, like they only needed one more, or actually they won 2 of their last 3 as well. But I still think they kind of stumbled into it. I mean, they beat like lesser teams. They're in the American Conference. 2 of those final 3 games that they won were against Temple and Charlotte. I mean, if you look at South Florida's wins on the season, none of them are impressive at all. They beat Florida A&M, Rice, Navy, UConn, and didn't even beat them by that much, barely beat Temple, and then got bowl eligible by beating Charlotte. This is not impressive, man. South Florida. I think what everybody remembers is they remember South Florida playing that somewhat close game against Alabama early in the season, when Alabama, I think, just didn't show up for that game, and Alabama didn't know who they were yet. I don't think that game really matters that much at all. South Florida is not very good. Their entire season has been very unimpressive to me. Syracuse at least plays in the ACC and at least played tougher competition. So I think Syracuse is certainly the better team here, but there are other motivational factors here that I think help Syracuse. Now, this is the roofclaim.com Boca Raton Bowl, by the way. I like making fun of these ridiculous sponsorship names here. Syracuse, I think, so both of these programs have actually not won a bowl for quite a while. South Florida actually has not won a bowl since 2017 or something like that. But Syracuse, they haven't won a bowl since, I believe, 2018, when they won the Camping World Bowl against West Virginia. So on both sides, I think there's somewhat motivation from that aspect of it. Like, we haven't won the bowl for so long. These guys on this team haven't won a bowl before. Syracuse, I think, actually had Tommy DeVito on their team back then when they won that game. New York Giants, Tommy DeVito, baby. I think he was on the team then. He didn't play in that game, though. But both of these teams, it's been quite a while, so I think they're going to be motivated from that perspective, because they want to win a bowl when it's been so long for either program. And people might not think that that's the case with Syracuse, because it seems like you see Syracuse showing up in some of these bowls, but it's been a while, man. I think they've been in a couple bowls since that one that they won, and they lost them. So these guys have not really experienced this before. People are going to look and think that, well, this game is in South Florida, so I think that South Florida has an advantage because of that. So, yeah, they might get more of a crowd here, but I don't know how much of an advantage that really is. Like, is that really a reward is the question. I guess maybe getting to a bowl is a reward for a program that doesn't get into that many bowls, so maybe. But when you play like right near your home, it also kind of has that effect, like we're not going anywhere, so it almost doesn't feel like it's totally a reward because you stay like right where you are and you're not going anywhere. So it kind of feels like less big in a way. And we kind of saw that happen with like New Mexico State, which I was surprised that Fresno State with no quarterback or with their backup quarterback did what they did in that game and just really blew out New Mexico State. That was kind of shocking to me. I thought New Mexico State maybe had an edge because they had the home crowd there, but I don't know. But Syracuse, I think, is going to travel decently. You got a lot of those snowbirds or whatever that are up in New England. It's the winter, or up in the Northeast, I should say, New York and New England. The Syracuse, like, they might have fans that are out of the area that want to go get some sun, some warm weather, and travel to Florida for this. And the biggest motivational factor here, I'm running out of time here. I'm talking about way too much already. Syracuse just fired their coach, and I think that's a positive. I've missed a couple of these spots this year in like the NFL, which I kind of regret. When a team fires a coach and the team doesn't like the coach, that usually like sparks that team, man. And Syracuse was, after they started 4-0 this year, and then they really fell apart like in the middle of the season. They faced some good teams and lost, and then didn't really get it back together, but then got it back together in the final weeks to get the bowl eligibility. They fired their coach anyway, and I think that might spark the team, man, because my impression is that they didn't really like this guy, and now the situation is they have an interim coach for this game, but he's not leaving the team. He's going to be on the coaching staff next year, so I think they're going to want to play for this guy. They know who their coach is going to be next year. He's not there yet. They got a new coach already, and they know who it is. I think they like that guy too, but the coach in this game, the interim guy, he is going to still be with the team next year as one of the coaching staff. So I like it. I like Syracuse here. I think they're undervalued. I think they're a significantly better team than South Florida. I think they have more motivation. I think the fired coach angle puts it over the top. I'm on Syracuse -3 in the what is it? The Boca Raton Bowl. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. And I'm fading the market. Like this is going with the market read as well. So I like it. Let's go to college basketball. There are numerous teams that I think are in bad spots in college basketball, but it's just like the games are like such mismatches that I can't quite do it. Like I think Syracuse is probably in a sandwich kind of. They're down from 19 to 17.5 with juice against Niagara, and Niagara is an in-state little brother to Syracuse in the state of New York. So Syracuse just beat Oregon by 20 points after beating Georgetown. So those wins are against bigger conference teams, even though they're not very good bigger conference teams. Those wins look pretty good. And then after this, they start conference play. They start ACC play with Pitt, but it's in 9 days. And then they get Duke and so on. They play the ACC after that. So it could be a spot where they overlook Niagara a little bit, but it's one of those games where the line is just so big. I kind of just don't really want to get involved with it. Like, Niagara is so bad that I think, even though it's factored into the line, I think that Syracuse, it's one of those games where it's possible they could dictate the score, but yeah, I don't know. So the slight lean to Niagara there. What other games we got going on here? There's so many games here that were kind of a similar like situation to that. Like I think Virginia Tech, are they in a situation like that? Kind of, maybe. They just beat Vermont. They're playing American University today. They got Wake Forest up next, starting ACC play. So they might be in a little bit of a spot like that, but they're up from 17 to 18.5 against American University. So I don't know about that one. Possibly a sandwich there. American just beat VMI, but not by much. So that doesn't matter. Really, as far as that's concerned, let me see here. Not really, maybe not a sandwich, but I think, well, maybe it is. I think Coastal Carolina is in a bad spot. This is a game that I could almost jump on North Carolina A&T here. Coastal Carolina, they just played a close game against Charleston as a huge underdog. Well, it wasn't really that close, which is kind of the issue I have with it. They played it to within 3 by the final score. They were getting blown out by Charleston in that game as a 16.5-point underdog. And they were still getting wrecked deep into the second half. They were down double digits with like a couple minutes left. And they somehow, I think Charleston just thought the game was over, basically. And Coastal Carolina made this huge late run in the final like minute or so and actually got to within they might have gotten to within 1 point, actually, which is really insane. So somehow gave Charleston a little bit of a scare there. Coastal Carolina made that huge run right near the end and then still just fell short as a huge underdog against, I believe, an in-state brother there. I think both of those teams are South Carolina. I'm not totally sure if Coastal is in South or North Carolina. I don't even know. Where are they? Where are they at? I think they're in South Carolina. I think they're both in South Carolina. So that was a big game for Coastal. And then Coastal starts conference play in the Sun Belt next with a game against Troy, who, even though Troy's not one of the better teams in that conference right now, I don't believe. It's hard to say because it depends on the strength of schedule discrepancy that we got going on here. But Coastal, I think, is in a bad spot there. And they got NCAAB. Coastal is a 9.5-point favorite. What do we got going on here? Actually, possibly up to 10. I don't see percentages on any of these yet, but I don't know, man. And NCAAB just lost to Jackson State, which is kind of I wouldn't say it's really an ugly loss. That was in Chris Paul's challenge, whatever the hell it was, in Las Vegas. NCAAB actually played that game pretty close. It's a pretty big underdog, a 9.5-point underdog. So that'll keep me off of it a little bit. I just don't want to quite do it, but I think Coastal Carolina is not really in a good spot after what they just did against Charleston. So that's kind of the way I look at that one. I don't know if there are other games on the board here that I go down the board and it's just like, this is just so crazy, man. I think Ohio State is debatably in a sandwich. I mean, they just beat UCLA, but we know UCLA is not playing very well, and they got West Virginia coming up next. But they're going to be a huge favorite here against New Orleans, like a 20-something point favorite. I think they might be up from 22.5 to 23 or something like that with Ohio State. They're down from 24 to 23.5. I don't know. So, they have that New Orleans game sandwiched in between two games against bigger conference opponents, though. So it is kind of a sandwich. So I would not want to be on Ohio State there. And New Orleans just played some like D2 school or something like that as kind of a tune-up. So that's the way I kind of look at that. Purdue, I think, is pretty clearly in a letdown spot after they just played a slew of big games. After they got upset by Northwestern, they beat Iowa, but I think Iowa's really down this year. Then they beat Alabama, who I think is underrated right now. Alabama is quite good. I think Alabama is deserving of being in the rankings, even though they aren't right now. And then they beat the number one ranked team, Arizona, to take the number one ranking away from Arizona. Huge win for Purdue there. So back-to-back big games. My issue with this is just that this is one of those like situations where Purdue could just dictate the score if they wanted to, man. They're playing Jacksonville. They're up from 32 to 33, and it looks like it's going through the 33, so I just can't get involved in it. I can't do it, even though it's a huge line, and Purdue might just take it really easy and try to get in and get out, but I'm not going to do it. Jacksonville just won and covered against UL Monroe, who's not very good. It was a decent win for Jacksonville. Jacksonville, they've been playing pretty well at home this year. They're not like a terrible team, but this is just like such a mismatch. I don't get involved in these mismatches like this, man. I just can't do it. I cannot do it. And then, I don't know. There's so many games that I looked at and I'm like, oh, I'm going to comment on this. Boston College, I think, is probably in a bad spot as they just beat St. John's. That was a big win. St. John's 5.5-point favorite there. BC playing pretty decently this year so far somehow, even though that was like their biggest win of the season, though they faced kind of an easier schedule so far. They got Wake Forest in conference play coming up next after they play Lehigh, but they're a 16.5-point favorite against Lehigh. So I'm staying off of this one too. They're actually up from 16.5 to 17 against Lehigh. But Boston College, I think, they're kind of in like a sandwich spot there as well. So many of these games, man, that could be commented on. It's such a huge slate of games. Oh man, it's tough. And then Texas San Antonio, I think, is kind of in a hangover spot because they just played back-to-back road games, and they played a tough road game against a Pac-12 team in Oregon State. They had a lead much of the game against Oregon State and then just fell short right at the end and lost by 1 at Oregon State. That was like a big effort for UTSA. Now they come off of that, and they got Army, and they're favored by 6.5 against Army. Man, an Army, they just lost to Stony Brook, which not a great game for Army there, but I don't know, man. Should I do it? I don't think I could get it. I don't think I can get involved in this. UTSA is up from 6 to 6.5, but I think that, let me see. I hope I don't have to do 2 videos here because this is taking me so long. Army's just one of the worst teams in the country, though, and KenPom has us at 8. I just can't do it. I'm not going to get them. I think the numbers guys are probably pushing that number up a little bit there. I'm not going to get involved in that one either. But Texas San Antonio, in my opinion, is definitely in a bad spot off of that. And unfortunately, UMass and Georgia Tech, I think, are both kind of in bad spots, and they're playing each other. UMass just beat West Virginia. So West Virginia pretty down this year, and they've had a lot of injuries. So not really a complete team right now. And UMass kind of dominated them, even though the final score is a little bit closer than what the game was for a lot of it. UMass was way ahead in that game. That was kind of a big win. You get to beat like a Big 12 school, but Georgia Tech just beat Penn State, a Big 10 school, even though Penn State might be a little bit down. I think they're kind of both off of big wins there. Now they're playing out in Hawaii, I believe. This is just a weird game. UMass is up to a 2.5-point favorite from 1. I don't know what's driving that line up like that, but Georgia Tech, I actually think, is the slightly better team, in my opinion. So I don't know. I don't know what we can take away from what's going on there. And then I also think UNLV is in a bad spot. They had just beaten Creighton. Huge upset for UNLV. Big game for UNLV. And then they played St. Mary's really close. I believe, again, probably as an underdog there. And that game went into 2 overtimes, I believe. Or at least maybe it was 1 overtime. I don't know. That was a tough game for them. And now they get Hofstra coming in. And then they play a cupcake. And then they play San Diego State after that with conference play starting. But Hofstra, they just beat Norfolk State. Like, I think it's kind of like, who cares about that? But it is going to be kind of a weird environment having to go out to UNLV. But UNLV, I think, is in a bad spot off of those 2 big wins there. And the line down from 5 to 4.5, even though UNLV's record is worse than Hofstra's. I think UNLV carries more like name recognition, more weight here. So people might look at that and think like that's a little bit weird, maybe a little bit odd there. So I would lean against UNLV a little bit. What's the game I'm actually on, though, after all this? I got to try to get this done quickly. I'm on Louisville plus 13.5, and I think the line's actually gone up from Kentucky, 12.5 to 13.5. I think Ken Palm has this game at right around 13, so kind of right where the number is. Kentucky actually has gone up to 13.5, but I like this for Louisville quite a bit. I think this is a bad spot for Kentucky. They just beat North Carolina. I would like this better if this was a sandwich, but they just beat North Carolina, and they're playing their first true road game of the season in this game, and it's at Louisville, who is the in-state little brother who's sitting at 1 game below 500 right now. So Kentucky's coming off a bigger game for them against North Carolina. That was a huge game. They beat North Carolina. Louisville's coming off like a stretch where they lost 3 games in a row, and then they were able to beat Pepperdine, which I would say is kind of like a tune-up game there. They smashed Pepperdine, so at least they were able to win that game. I think that's going to start like some new winning momentum for them. That's a good win for them to break that losing momentum. And Louisville, like I was saying, they're the in-state little brother to Kentucky here, man. So I think they're going to be motivated. This is a big spot for Louisville here. This is maybe this is one of the biggest games on their schedule. Even though, of course, they're in the ACC, so they're going to wind up playing Duke and stuff like that. This is the biggest game so far for them. Huge game. They get to host Kentucky, and Kentucky is off of maybe their biggest game and their biggest win, at least, over North Carolina there. Kentucky's, I think, in a letdown spot. They're laying a lot of points to be laying, especially when it's in your first true road game, even though it's in their same state, and they're probably going to have a crowd show up for this game because they're the University of Kentucky, but this is at Louisville, man, so it is in their arena. I like Louisville plus 13.5. That's the only play I have on the board in college basketball after I talked about all those other games. Crazy. Moving to the NBA, one thing I would say is I lean against the Grizzlies, although I don't think I can quite do it, although the market looks decent for it, but the line has lost some value. So the Grizzlies are down from 4.5 to 2.5, as they're actually a home favorite now with the way they've been playing compared to the way the Pacers have been playing. This could be like a value play where you fade like the Grizzlies' recent play and jump on the Pacers after their poor recent play since they were in that in-season tournament, really. They haven't played well. 85% of the tickets on Memphis, with 62% of the cash on them. People know the Grizzlies. They got Ja back now. They got Morant back. I didn't like them in the first game that they played with Morant because it's kind of like that reverse injured player theory type of situation, whatever it is, reverse suspended player. I don't know if he was suspended or injured or whatever, but we have that first game where that guy comes back, usually it takes you a while to get that flow back and get that momentum, especially when it's a star player that can take over. It's like really disruptive. Memphis was losing by like 24 points in the second half of that game, and I don't know how it happened, but they somehow won the game outright against the Pelicans. And now they're returning home, although it's only from a 2-game road trip. And they get Indiana. They do have Atlanta up next, but I don't think Atlanta's been playing very well either. Are they going to be focused on Indiana after they had that huge win? That was a big win. You get Ja back and you get the win, a huge comeback. That required a huge effort. So I do think Memphis is in the worst spot here. And Indiana, they lost a bunch of games in a row. They lost 4 games in a row, but most of them were to good teams. Although Milwaukee, Minnesota, and Clippers, you can excuse those losses, even though they gave up 151 to LA. Indiana has been giving up some high point totals, man. Their defense not good. I think Halliburton might have been injured that entire stretch too. I don't know if he's coming back. Actually, I guess he was playing in those games. Now he missed. I think he only missed 1 game, maybe. I don't even know, or maybe a couple games. They finally won against Charlotte, and they put up a good showing against Charlotte, but that was yesterday, so they're in a back-to-back. So even though it wasn't like a max effort game for them because they put it away pretty early on, I don't love playing Indiana in the back-to-back here, even though I think it's a better spot for them. I think yesterday, and they're playing a third game in 4 days in 2 different cities. Now they're going out on the road for just this one game. I do think they'll be focused. I do think that Charlotte game kind of like disrupted their bad momentum and gave them like a new win streak. I think it's going to start some positive momentum for the Pacers. I just can't quite get there with that one. Although I do lean to Indiana there, but they're in the back-to-back, like I said. But Memphis coming off that huge win that we saw on TNT with that gigantic comeback. I don't know what they're going to have left there. They might still be trying to get used to having Morant back there. So that might not be the best spot for Memphis there. But the line has moved a bit in that one. I'm not sure if it's warranted that Memphis is the favorite. I think overall, though, Memphis has been kind of undervalued throughout the season so far because of their really awful recent play, whereas Indiana has been kind of overvalued because of really good early season play, whereas maybe they're not as good as what they looked early on. So that one's a little bit of a tough one to handicap, to be honest. What am I actually going to be on? I'm fading the market in one of these. I don't know why the market is doing what it's doing, but I'm on the San Antonio Spurs. The Bulls are up from 3.5 to 5 with 82% of the cash on them, but 53% of the cash on the San Antonio Spurs. I don't see how this is at all a good spot for the Chicago Bulls. I thought the Bulls were in a bad spot last night. The Bulls we're coming home from a road trip where they beat Miami, then lost to Miami by 2 in the zigzag. Then they beat the 76ers, probably their biggest win of the season, beating the 76ers. Huge win. 1 day off. They come home. They get the Lakers coming in there, and they beat the Lakers too, and they beat them by 16 points. Really good game for the Bulls last night, and now they're playing a third game in 4 days, a back-to-back. It's actually a 4th game in 6 and I believe it's a 5th game in 8 and a 6th game in 10 and a 7th game in 11 days. This is crazy, man. They've had a jammed schedule, and the Bulls just won in San Antonio right before that stretch. They won on December 8th in San Antonio, so this is kind of a quick road reversal, revenge type of thing. And the Bulls do have Cleveland, Atlanta, Indiana, Philadelphia, New York, all up next. So this might be like the down spot in the schedule for them, where they might overlook San Antonio a little bit. In the spot that they're in, coming off these bigger games, and they have bigger games up after this too. Are you really going to be focused on one of the teams that has one of the worst records in basketball? I don't know. I think it's a bad spot, man. Almost a sandwich is at least like a letdown spot. It's a bad rest spot. San Antonio's in a better rest spot. They've at least had a day off. They just lost to Milwaukee by 13, even though I actually think they covered the spread in that one, which is crazy. I don't know if Wemby, I don't know if he's actually hurt, because I don't think he played in that Milwaukee game. So maybe he's injured, which is maybe why the line is where it is. I'm not sure. Maybe I should actually look, but I like this. He's day-to-day. He's probable. I think it looks like he's going to play. Keldon Johnson looks like he's also probable. They did lose Bassey with an ACL tear, so he's out. But that was 9 days ago at this point. So that they've already gotten past that. So it looks like Wemba didn't play in the last game. He's the star player on San Antonio right now. I think he's going to be back for this one. I don't think it's a reverse injured player theory spot or anything like that, because they didn't do that well without him, really, even though it was a tough opponent in Milwaukee. I like San Antonio here. I think it's a bad spot for Dallas. Like I said, San Antonio at least has another day off. They started the road trip in Milwaukee, didn't do that great. They have a day off. I think they might be focused on this game, especially because Chicago just beat them in their own house not that long ago. I think they remember that. This line is up to 5 points at this point. I don't understand what the market is doing in that one. The line when it was in San Antonio was only Chicago -1.5. So, yeah, I mean, this line is, I guess, about kind of in line with where that one was. Chicago, obviously the better team, but they're not really that much better of a team than San Antonio is. I'm on San Antonio +5. I'm doing it. I think it's a bad spot for the Bulls. I'm going against what the market is showing me here. So a lot of times I don't like to do that, but I'm doing it here, and I'm doing it in one of these other games. What's the other game I'm on? Where it looks like we're already maybe losing some value here on the Washington Wizards. The Portland Trailblazers have gone down from 6.5 to 4 at this point. And I think, what was I able to get here? Yeah, I was only able to get the 4 on the Wizards, but this is a bad spot for the Portland Trailblazers, man. And Trailblazers are hugely public too, which is shocking, but it's because it's against the Wizards. They have 97% of tickets and 95% of the cash. Nobody wants anything to do with the Wizards. Portland Trailblazers being public, even though they're a 7-19 team, that's just totally insane, but it's totally based on what we just saw recently. They've had a stretch of big games recently. In their last 2 games, they played Golden State to within 4, which I believe was a game I was on the Blazers, and the Blazers could have won that game. It was tied really late. They almost won it, and then the next game, they turned around and beat the Phoenix Suns, and now they have Golden State again up next on Saturday, and then Sacramento after that. So this is the down spot in their schedule, man. They're in a letdown spot. That was a big win over Phoenix. Phoenix was a 7.5-point favorite in that one. Portland Trailblazers had a nice game there, big second half, won the game. Now they get the Washington Wizards coming in 4-22 on the season, one of the worst records in basketball. Washington has had extra days off, man. They're in the middle of a road trip. They started 0-2, and they just lost to Phoenix on the road trip. So people might look at that and say, well, if Phoenix beat Washington and Portland beat Phoenix, and of course Phoenix is going to beat Washington. Like, why is of course Portland's going to beat Washington? Why is Portland only laying 4 points here? Like, that looks crazy to me. What's going on there? I think that's the wrong way to look at it. That's like that syllogism thing. Every game's an individual situation. Washington has 2 days off, and they didn't play that well in their previous game. They're coming off a pretty tough game against Phoenix where they only lost by 4. I don't know if that was the game I was on. No, the Portland one was the one I was on, but those games like look really similar. Yeah, the Portland versus Golden State and then Washington versus Phoenix had similar looks to them. But Washington played tough versus Phoenix. Then they had a worse game at Sacramento after that. That was also a back-to-back for them. It was a third game in 4 days, all in different cities. They had a jammed schedule. Now they have 2 days off, which I think is going to help them refocus a little bit. I think Washington can be focused on this game. I think it's a spot where Portland might lapse in focus a little bit after what they've just done. I think it's a sandwich for Portland because they do have Golden State up next, and Golden State still has those star players on the team and carries a lot of weight there with their name recognition. Even though we've lost a little bit of value on this line, I like getting the Wizards as a multiple basket underdog here. The line is moving in that direction. It's reverse line moving. It's where the public is pretty quick there. So I'm on the Washington Wizards. And then going into the NHL, I'm actually on 3 games. There are just a lot of spots where I can't help myself here. The first one, well, man, I could say, what was I going to say? I think, I don't know, I was going to mention like one of these other spots real quickly. I think Calgary and Anaheim, I think maybe are both in bad spots because I was kind of eyeing that one because Calgary is off a couple of big wins over the Florida teams, the Lightning and the Panthers at home. Now they go out on the road, and that, going out on the road sometimes a positive, but not when you've been winning against really good teams at home. But then you look at Anaheim, they're returning home from a road trip, and they won the last 2, including beating the Red Wings in their last game on the road trip. So I think it's a bad spot for both teams, so I just can't do it. The line's gone up on that one from Calgary, 145 to 169 on the money line as a road favorite. Got to try to get this done quickly. They have 98% of the cash, but 89% of the tickets on them. So I'm just going to avoid that one. What am I actually on? Let's get this done. 3 plays. I'm on the Pittsburgh Penguins again, even though it looks like Carolina's gone up from -111 to -126 as a road favorite with 95% of the tickets. This has 100% of the cash on them. I don't know what the cash percentage really is on Carolina, but Carolina's going to be the public team here after what we've seen out of them recently. I think they're in a bad spot. They just beat the Vegas Knights, man, the returning champs 2 days ago. I think they're in a letdown spot. They're coming off that. They do have the Islanders next, who have been playing better hockey recently, and in between that, they have to go over to Pittsburgh. I think they're in a letdown spot. You just beat Vegas 6-3, man. I think you're going to be a little bit overvalued, and you're laying a favorite price on the road, even though Pittsburgh did just beat Minnesota. I was on Pittsburgh, and that Pittsburgh was off a 7-0 loss to Toronto, which is just totally embarrassing. Pittsburgh has had multiple days off now, and I think they're going to be focused. They don't really have anything upcoming. They have Ottawa upcoming. Who cares? I think they're going to be focused on Carolina coming into their house, and they did lose to Carolina earlier this year on November 18th. They lost at Carolina, so that might give them a little bit of extra motivation. In that Minnesota game, they actually played better than it looks. They were winning the game 3-0 and let the entire lead slip, and then they had to win late in the game in the third period. Sidney Crosby on the power play. Pittsburgh played better in that game than the final score makes it look. I like Pittsburgh there. I'm on it at plus 110. I don't think Carolina should be that much of a road favorite in that one, coming off a huge upset of Vegas there. Carolina, that was a big, big game for them. Pittsburgh flying a little bit under the radar, even though they have the name recognition. They're around a 500 team, and people might be not totally paying attention to them. So I like Pittsburgh in that one. Maybe that's the weakest of these three plays, but I don't know. And then what else am I on? I'm on two big underdogs here that I'm just grabbing the money line. I'm hoping that at least one of the two just cashes, which is what you do with these big money line underdogs, where it's in that no man's land situation in hockey, where taking the puck line, you have to lay too much of a price, like minus 140 or so on both of these. That's too much to take the puck line of plus 1.5 goals on this. I say you just roll with the money line, and if the team wins like 40-something% of the time, you're going to win money on it. I think we're fading two teams in bad spots here. One of the games I'm on is the St. Louis Blues against Florida. I think this is a bad spot for Florida. They're down from 205 to 201 as a home favorite. They got 93% of the tickets. It looks like 100% of the cash. Don't know what to think about that. Obviously, that's not correct, but they are a public team. And what are they doing? They're returning home from a road trip. They do have 2 days off, but it was a long 5-game road trip out to the Pacific Northwest. They only went 2-3, and they lost to Vancouver on that road trip. They lost to Calgary to finish the road trip. Wasn't that impressive of a road trip, but people might think, well, now they're going to bounce back because they're returning home from a road trip, right? They just lost to Calgary to finish the road trip. I don't think so. As I always say, when you return home from the road trip, you get those distractions coming into play there. You got to deal with the return home situation, especially a long road trip that took you very far geographically. I think you're not totally focused right away, especially when it's a St. Louis team that hasn't been playing well in Florida. They have Vegas up next, man. I don't know if they've played Vegas yet this year, but I believe, that's the Stanley Cup rematch game, man, and they have not played them yet this year. Vegas is the team that beat them in the finals last year. That's a huge look ahead. And then they have Tampa Bay and the Rangers up after that. This is a bad spot for Florida, man. They're returning home. They have a huge look ahead to Vegas. St. Louis, what are they coming off of? They just lost 6-1 to Tampa, even though I thought Tampa was in a pretty bad spot in that one. I think Tampa was returning home from a road trip. St. Louis, they were coming off a tough game where they won against Dallas in overtime, though, 4-3. So that was a big win for St. Louis. So they might have been in a bad spot there. They just got wrecked by Tampa. I thought it was going to be closer than it was there, at least, because Tampa was also in a bad spot. Tampa housed them 6-1. And when you're coming off that, you want to turn it around, man. You want to do something. You got 1 day off to try to refocus yourselves a little bit there. That's a bad loss. I think you're going to bounce back a little bit. You got Florida. They're the team that won the Eastern Conference last year. They're coming into your house. Florida, like I said, they're in a bad spot for all those reasons I mentioned. St. Louis just has Chicago coming up next. I think they're not going to be looking ahead to that. I think they're going to be focused on Florida here. It's a pretty big game for St. Louis. They just played a really bad game. I think they're going to be focused on this. I think it's a good spot to take St. Louis, and I'm on it at plus 180. And then on the money line, and then the other game I'm on, very similar, which this game's a little bit dicier, I think, situation-wise, but Minnesota against Montreal. Minnesota's down from 201 to 193 on the money line, so it is falling. It's reverse line moving. Minnesota's got 61% of the tickets on them, but 53% of the cash on the Montreal Canadiens. And So it looks like there's reverse line movement and a big cash discrepancy on the side of the Canadians. The Canadians aren't in the best spot, I would say, because they did just beat the Islanders and then the Jets in overtime. They beat the Jets that as a huge underdog. So that is a big win, but they don't have anything up next, and they've had 2 days off since then. So I don't know. You could argue Montreal's in a letdown spot, but when you're with just one game above 500 like that, well, not including overtime losses. I never include overtime losses in that, really, because it just doesn't look right. But you're coming off a big win, yes, but you got 2 days off, and you're going to Minnesota, and you just have a game against Chicago coming up tomorrow. I think you're going to want to be focused on at least one of those games, and it's probably going to be this Minnesota game here. And I don't know what Montreal's goaltender situation is, but they've been shifting between 3 different goaltenders, so it's possible they use I don't know who they'll use because they have 2 days off. So even though they're coming off a big win, I think this is way worse for Minnesota, and the market is definitely indicating on Montreal here. Minnesota, they're in a Boston Bruins sandwich, man. They just won at Boston 2 days ago. Now they're playing a third game in 4 days, all in different cities, a fourth game in 6 days, a fifth game in 8 days, although the first 2 of those games are at home. Those were both shootout wins against Calgary and Vancouver. Then they lost in the game against Pittsburgh that I was on because I thought it was a bad spot for them in between all these big games. That was a sandwich. They actually put in a pretty big effort to tie that game after they fell down 3 goals and then still fell short against Pittsburgh. Then they went to Boston the next day, which is another reason I thought Pittsburgh was a good play there. And they beat Boston in overtime. Boston was winning that game by 1 goal for a lot of it. Minnesota tied it. I think took the lead, then Boston tied it back up. Then it went into overtime, and they beat my Bruins, who are losing a lot of overtime games, and this is not good for me. Huge win, though, in overtime. They come back home, and they get Montreal, who is not really the best team, and they have the Bruins up again next, and then Detroit, and then Winnipeg twice. They might overlook Montreal here, man. This is a down spot in their schedule. Even though Montreal is coming off a big win, I think this is a much worse spot for the Wild. That was a huge win. Even though I think Fleury was in net in that one. So I think Gustafsson is going to be probably back in net for Minnesota in this one. So maybe that's a little bit of an advantage for Minnesota because I think he is their primary goaltender there. And I've never thought that Fleury was even really that good, but he carries a lot of that name recognition there. But they're off a huge win over Boston, and they have Boston again next. I think it's a bad spot. It's a sandwich spot, a Boston sandwich. I like it. I was going to mention like a specific, what is it? A Boston sandwich. Say a meatball parmesan. It's a nice Italian sandwich. Maybe a chicken parm going on there. Montreal, I'm on at plus 170. So recapping before I run out of time here. College basketball, I got Louisville plus 13.5. In college football, I'm on Syracuse -3 in that Boca Raton Bowl. NBA, Wizards +4, San Antonio Spurs +5, and hockey, St. Louis Blues +180, Pittsburgh Penguins +110, and Montreal Canadiens +170. That's going to do it for me, man. My camera's all shaking. I got it done just in the nick of time. This, I'm doing the shocker. Whoops. No, I'm not. Just in the nick of time here because this software, I'm not using StreamYard for this one. So this is a free site that caps me at 45 minutes. Let's do it, man. Huge slate of games today. Let's hope we get back on the winning side here. It's a lot of quantity today, so hopefully I'm doing all right here. Peace.